I'm typing this from an airport bathroom stall because I don't know who is waiting for me outside my gate, and I don't think it's the person I thought it was. I'm not new to long-distance relationships, but this one still haunts me. At 18, I met Evan, not his real name, online. He was 20. I lived in the city. He lived deep in rural North Carolina, one of those towns with a single gas station, no Uber, and woods that didn't allow a phone call to go through for miles. We talked constantly. TikTok, Instagram DMs, FaceTime. After 8 months, I flew down and stayed with him and his family for almost a month. It was weird but sweet. Quiet house, polite family, everyone praying before every meal. His grandma said things like, "A good woman tames a restless man," and "Evan dreams loudly." I thought it was Southern religious quirkiness. When I left, he broke up with me a week later. Blocked me on everything. No explanation. He disappeared. 2 years passed. I'm 20 now. Out of nowhere, I got the urge to text him. Not because I wanted him back. More like unfinished business. Trauma nostalgia, or whatever. I still had his number saved, but I expected the text to send green or bounce back with an error. I literally typed, "Hey, why I'm sending this. Hope you're good, Ev." I hit send. It sent blue. It was red within seconds. My stomach dropped. I almost threw my phone. Then he replied, "Is this really you? I've been waiting for you to text me back." And I'm like, text me back? He hadn't texted me once since he blocked me. Maybe he meant reach out again. Whatever. I didn't overthink. We started talking, and he was perfect. Kind, warm, apologetic without being weird. He said he never dated anyone else after me. He missed me. He still had my side of the bed. He said his mom and grandma asked about me for months. Looking back, that part bothers me the most. We didn't FaceTime. He said his phone camera was cracked. Old excuse. Familiar. I let it slide. We only called at night. The connection always sounded thick, like he was covering the mic with a pillow, or calling from inside a closet. Sometimes I'd hear shuffling or breathing beside him, and when I asked, he'd say, "Just my dog. He sleeps weird." Like, okay, sure. They had a dog when I visited, but it was a she, and she clung onto his younger brother, like all the time. She never went into Evan's room, let alone slept in his bed, so at this point, I'm a little weirded out. But every time something felt off, he'd say something perfect, something nostalgic enough to disarm me, and I let myself believe him. Finally, we decide I'll visit again. He sounds thrilled, too thrilled, and begs me not to tell anyone I'm coming. He says he wants it to be a special surprise. Stupidly, I believe him. I book a flight. Today. This morning. I'm on the plane, descending, excited and sick at the same time. I haven't traveled alone since I was 18. I take a photo of the cloud through the window, cliché airplane shot, and impulsively tag him on Instagram. I write, "Almost there." Within a minute, he sees it. Then he DMs me. "Why did you tag me? What the hell is wrong with you? Why are you flying here? Stop. Seriously. Stop." I freeze. My stomach hits the floor. I click his profile. A public Instagram I haven't checked in years. Pinned post his engagement photos. Dated 1 year ago. Recent story. A video of him and his fiancée decorating a Christmas tree last night. They look happy. He looks the same. So who have I been talking to? My hands are shaking so hard the typing is blurry. Someone or something has been using that number, and they knew everything about me. As I'm standing up to leave the plane, my phone vibrates from the old number. "Can't wait to see you. I'm right here by the exit like last time." I look toward the front of the plane. Someone is standing silhouetted in the narrow hallway. Tall, still, facing the door, not moving even as passengers tell him to step aside. Just waiting. I'm in an airport bathroom now. The flight attendants asked if he was with me. I said no. They said he wouldn't answer them. Just stood there breathing through his nose like he was trying not to smile. I don't know what to do. If this posts, please tell me what to do. My connecting flight home isn't for 6 hours, and someone is still texting me. "I missed you so much the first time. Your side of the bed is ready." Come back. Come home. I hear footsteps outside the stall. Not airport footsteps. Slow. Bare. Dragging. I don't think that dog ever really went near him, if I remember correctly. But something was always in that room with us when we called. And it remembers me. I wish that were the punchline to some terrible joke. But if you'd lived in our house for the past 18 months, you'd know better than to question Ella's sincerity. Nothing is funny to her anymore. My wife used to be a joker. That was before we spent 1.5 years unsuccessfully trying to conceive a child. Back then, she wore irony like a jumpsuit, a defensive article so well fastened to her body, she would have been unable to remove it in a hurry. But Ella lost that side of herself after months upon months of failed attempts at conception. I wanted the two of us to take fertility tests earlier this year, but it wasn't until 2 weeks ago that she agreed. The results were bad on both fronts. My swimmers were few in number, and Ella's estrogen levels were rather low. Treatment was mentioned, but my wife was too distraught to discuss that, so the doctor simply suggested we keep trying. Ella had already been far from her chirpy self for months, but she became twice as reserved over the following fortnight. Her spell was only broken on Saturday morning, around 3 o'clock, when the two of us were stirred from our sleep by a rapping on the bedroom window. Or maybe I was stirred by the ecstatic gasp Ella let out. "What's that noise?" I asked as the knocking persisted. I rubbed my eyes as my wife eagerly bounded out of bed and rushed towards the window. She tore open the drapes and invited streetlight into the room. "It's here," she whispered. Half awake, with my eyesight and brain both woolly, I saw something absurd perching on that wooden ledge. Two things, I should say. A baby swaddled in pristine white fabric, and whiter still, a stork. The bird sat with its blood-red legs tucked under its large white feathers, watching with black eyes of unnerving intellect, as Ella opened the window and scooped the sleeping baby from its resting position on the ledge. "Thank you," my wife said to the animal. Meanwhile, I hadn't managed to say a thing. I was dumbfounded into silence, I suppose, because there was a fucking stork on our windowsill. A fucking stork that had, more nonsensically still, brought us a newborn babe in a cotton burrito wrap to our suburban home at 3:17 a.m. And as the bird brandished its impressive wingspan, elongating its slender legs as it did, my jaw dropped, perhaps in preparation for me to finally utter something to my wife. Ella shut the window and cradled the mystery child as its mystery delivery bird took flight, slipping into the dark. "What the hell is happening, Ella?" seemed as appropriate a starting question as any. She replied without taking her eyes off the child in her arms. "I did something, Philip." I didn't like that response. "What did you do? Whose child is that?" "Ours." Then my wife, who had been despondent for 18 months, giggled contentedly. Teardrops ran the length of her face, wrapping around her chin and meeting her neck. I hadn't seen her joyful in a long while, and I'd never seen her that tearful. As I mentioned at the beginning of this post, I didn't question the legitimacy of the scenario for even a second. My wife wasn't pranking me. She wasn't joking around. She wasn't capable of that after having been so broken for so long. Given it was all real then, I was more terrified than I had ever been. "Ella, I don't understand. Where did that child," I began, not knowing what word to choose, "originate?" A silly word, perhaps, but I knew the newborn hadn't originated from us. Obviously, you might say, but nothing seems obvious to me anymore. Not after what Ella and I experienced this weekend. "Originate," she said. "Well, from the stork, of course." I sighed. "Ella, the stork brought us a child. You saw it with your own eyes." "I don't know what I saw." "Okay," she said absently, still not looking away from that thing in her arms. I hated thinking of the child that way, as a thing. But this whole ordeal felt unnatural, supernatural. Why? Call it a gut instinct, even if that makes your eyes roll, but I'm not some Fruit Loop. Until that day, I'd never leant one way or the other when it came to superstitions or paranormal phenomena. That morning, however, I felt the tingle of some sense I hadn't previously known I even possessed. This was very bad. Not that my wife has bought a child from the black market bad, I got out from under the duvet and trotted delicately over to my wife, opting to take the gentler approach. I placed my hands over hers and rocked the baby with her. She looked up at me, finally, and smiled. I'd earned her attention. "Ella, I need you to tell me exactly what you meant when you said you did something." She leant forwards and planted a kiss on my cheek. "Isn't it obvious? I found a way for us to have a child, Philip. The stork brought us a gift from the heavens." Ridiculous. Sure, I'd heard the myths of storks carrying bundled babies in their beaks. Myths. But now I wonder whether myths have some root in truth. Maybe those old stories about the storks and the babies came from something real. "Sweetheart," I said, "that stork and this baby did not come from the heavens. Please just be straight with me. Why and how are they really here? What did you do?" Ella's smile dropped a little, and she looked hurt. "Screw you, Philip." "Screw me," I scoffed. "I wake up at 3 in the morning to find a baby on our windowsill, and I'm the arsehole in this situation? For crying out loud, Ella, just tell me what." "The receptionist." Ella screamed in my face, before taking a breath and continuing quietly. "When we were leaving the clinic last week, and you were still talking to Dr. Harper, the receptionist consoled me. She told me a number to call." "What do you mean?" I asked. "What number?" Ella ignored me. "I called it. Then I waited 11 days, like the man said. Waited for our ripe child." Ripe. I didn't like the way that clunky and oddly chosen word had been wedged into her last sentence. "The man?" I asked. "Ella, you're being so cryptic. Please, help me out here." I waited 11 days, and that brings us to this morning. A white-winged angel delivered this gorgeous boy to us. A boy of our own. Just what we've been killing ourselves to create for nearly 2 years. We've earned this, Philip. We've worked hard enough for it, haven't we? Haven't we? I don't know why I gave up at that moment. I think my brain broke completely. I think we need to sleep now, I whispered, walking over to the window. Ella nodded and smiled again. "Yeah, I suppose I should put little Adam down into the cot." When I really think about it, I'm quite sure I believed sleep would fix everything, that I'd wake up to find this had all been a dream, because how could it possibly be real? I would wake up to find nothing in the guest room's cot, that preemptive and rather distasteful, as far as I was concerned, hand-me-down from Ella's mother. I closed the drapes in one swift motion, but my heart shriveled and tightened in fear. Greater fear than had been induced by even the revelation of the stork or the baby on the windowsill. I processed what I had seen for that split second. A man standing on the other side of the street. He had been looking up at our window. When I opened the curtains again to get a second look, he was gone. Of course he was gone. But that was a blessing from my perspective, as it only helped me to dismiss the whole thing as sleep-deprived madness. Just a bizarre dream born of your heartbreak in this complicated time. You're grieving the child you and Ella are unable to conceive. That's all. You'll see when you wake up. And then you'll book a therapist because, let's be honest, this is the most lucid nightmare of your life. But that inner pep talk didn't change the truth. I woke to find Ella scurrying about the house, with Adam nestling in the nook of her arm, and I followed her about like a ghost, blinking repeatedly, trying to blink the baby out of existence, perhaps. Everything I experienced that day went in one ear and out the other. Baby monitors, and baby proofing, and baby this, and baby that. But I'm not some shithead of a husband. I was just reeling from the horror of it all. A baby had materialized out of thin air in the middle of the night. Oh no, I'm sorry. A stork brought it, which means the man was real too, was the next frightening thought starred at asterisk. My gut lurched, and I spent most of Saturday staring out of windows at our empty street, and the daylight vanished quickly on that short winter day, so I was left staring out into the black, fighting to discern shapes moving between the glow of the street lamps. My heart didn't loosen. I don't think it had loosened since Adam arrived. "Philip," said Ella at the end of the day, "I'm going to need you to help me out more tomorrow." I frowned at my wife, who was once so sharp-minded. "What the hell is wrong with you? I know you've not been yourself for a long time, but this isn't that. Now you're barely acting human. Never mind acting like Ella. A stork delivered a baby to our window. We know nothing about this child. We know nothing about that man in the street. And I know you feel that tightness in your chest, just like I do. The warning that something unearthly is afoot, that we need to get out of here right now. That was the speech I should have given Ella. Sorry, I replied instead. I know my behavior seems strange, but I was in shock. Have you ever experienced an existential horror that forced you to question your very understanding of reality? It does something to you. Your brain, your entire sense of being. In my case, I was left a husk. I went to bed that night hoping, once again, I would wake up to find none of it had been real. And when I woke at 2:03 a.m. in a sweat, I did, for perhaps as many as 3 or 4 seconds. Believe just that. Oh, it was a terrible dream after all, and I'm awake now. But the crackle from the baby monitor grounded me. Adam was crying, and I felt like crying with him as I headed down the corridor. I entered the guest room to find the baby wriggling about in his cot, bawling and slobbering and snotting all over himself. "Hush, baby," I cooed, picking up our child for the first time. He settled immediately. I had hoped that holding him might change things, might warm my heart, might make me decide it didn't matter where the baby had originated. It didn't matter how he had come into our possession. It didn't matter whether the stork had been responsible, or had simply been a decorative part of an elaborate delivery orchestrated by that mysterious figure in the street. But holding the baby made everything worse. My fingers had never felt so frozen. Not figuratively, but quite literally frozen, for the baby was ice cold to the touch. Worse yet, Adam looked at me with a face like no other. Again, I'm not being a shithead. I have nephews and nieces in abundance. I've seen and held newborns before. I know they all look different, but this just wasn't right. I've never seen a baby's face quite like his. Never seen a human's face quite like his. Adam wasn't safe. That was all I thought as he smiled up at me, in a manner too knowing, in a manner unthinkably sinister. His little fingers curled around one of mine, striking me with terror so pointed and piercing that I thought my heart might give out there and then. I'd been right all along. This baby was a thing. Just as I was about to put Adam back into the cot and flee the house, grabbing Ella in the process, I was glued to the spot by a sound, a creak from the wardrobe at the other side of the room. My hands at long last warmed up, becoming clammy as I faced the now-ajar door of the closet to find darkness. My imagination had conjured up all sorts of horrors staring back at me through the crack. So I let out a sigh of relief and lay Adam back down. I even tried to settle my gut by telling myself the baby was perfectly ordinary, that it was only the situation which was unordinary. Of course, no matter what my wife had agreed with the stranger on the phone, I imagined there could be no legal or ethical explanation for how she acquired Adam. Still, he was just a baby, I told myself. He had to be. It happened as I was distracted by his cherub face. The door to the wardrobe swung open, and by the time I had clocked the shape moving towards me, it was already upon me. He was upon me. That man, face masked by the shade of that unlit room with drapes drawn closed. I screamed as he pinned me to the ground, elbow flattening my windpipe, and the world faded as he spoke to me in a tone full of grit. "You're not the father he needs. You see too much of him, don't you? You shouldn't. He isn't ripe yet." The black outline of my vision pushed inwards, stealing away the world. I thought of Ella and even baby Adam. My greatest fright was that, once my life had been extinguished, they would be next. At the edge of blackness, there came tremendous noise. A screech, footsteps against the floor, a scuffle, then an agitated voice. I felt the force lift from my windpipe, and I could breathe properly again. "Philip," Ella cried as she turned on the light. My eyesight readjusted as Ella reached over the cot to scoop out Adam, and I sat upright to get a look at the body of my attacker. He lay unmoving in a pool of blood, knife handle jutting from one temple. I don't know how my wife overpowered him. I don't know anything after this weekend. Ella and I spent most of Sunday talking to police investigators, explaining that my wife had killed the intruder in self-defense. What I found strangest was that the detectives had no questions about the baby at the heart of this break-in and murder attempt. The baby who, I was sure, would not show up on any official records. I was doubly sure Ella and I wouldn't be listed as his parents. They should have had questions. That's what I keep thinking. That and something one of the officers said, with a wry smile, before leaving our home. Goodbye, Adam. You ripe little thing. Everything's falling apart around me. Friends, family, and strangers alike have all succumbed to whatever this is. My world is crumbling before me. And you know the worst part? I can't do a thing about it. Not that I'm sure I'd be able to anyways, though. It started just yesterday evening, though it seems like such a long time ago now. I get sick easily, which makes me wonder why I was able to go so long without it affecting me. What did affect me was a nasty case of the flu. Caught it 4 days before all of this happened, and it knocked me right out. 1 second, I was getting home from work and preparing to do some homework. The next, I was bedridden and trying to expel the sickness any way I could. That really is the worst part. Not being able to do a thing about this. I can't help anyone. I can't help myself. I can't do anything. I had no clue what was going on until Mom got home from the store last night with all the essentials she'd get when one of us boys were sick. She looked shaken, like she'd seen a ghost. I couldn't see her. My bedroom door was closed, but I could hear her. It sounded like she was circling around the same spot over and over again. Pacing from stress, maybe, I wasn't sure. After a while, the pacing stopped, and I could hear the footsteps approaching my room. She knocked, and I did my best to let her know she could come in. She entered my room with some ginger ale and other items you'd normally have when sick. As she dropped some of them off, I got curious and tried to find out what had happened. I almost regret finding out, and I'm sure Mom regretted telling me, but something like this can't stay a secret. I'm going to tell you what happened. Mom seemed a little frantic as she dropped my essentials off, so I decided to bite and try and ask her what had happened. Mom, what happened? You okay? I rasped the words, my sore throat quickly having to adapt to me talking. It hurt. She said. Something at the store. What? I asked. I really don't think you need to know. She replied, It's messed up. I may not have needed to know, but I certainly wanted to. I figured I'd keep pestering her until I got an answer. I'd like to. I said, trying to shrug my shoulders. I was unable to, but she got the point from looking at me attempting it. Just curious. Are you really sure you want to know what happened? She asked. It's like I already told you. It was messed up. Why, yes. I rasped. Okay. She said, pulling out my desk chair and taking a seat while facing me. I did warn you, though. Apparently something had happened to someone just outside of the store. It was horrible. Mom said, Do you know Rob from the antique store? Seen him around. I said, Why? Well, something happened to him today, something bad. She replied, It was just before I went in. I was a little bit behind him, so he would have made it in before me. He would have made it if he didn't suddenly collapse near the entrance. I remained silent. Better that I didn't put any strain on my throat. There were others, but they just stood around and didn't do anything. I took it upon myself to go and help him. But, oh God, it was horrible. I didn't reply, just nodded my head. There was blood, coming out of his mouth. But there was this other stuff too. It was yellow, kind of chunky, like vomit almost. At this point, she had to take a second and cover her mouth, taking measures not to throw up, I assumed. Okay, she resumed. It was like vomit, but not so solid. It was similar in texture to gelatin. It was leaking out of Rob's mouth in addition to the blood. As I looked closer, I could see the same yellow gunk on different parts of his face. It looked darker and more concentrated around his eyes, ears, and nose. Maybe where it had started. Or maybe he inhaled something. My heart began to thump a little quicker. It couldn't be assumed that this was just a bad allergic reaction to something like pollen. It was possible for this kind of thing to happen. But what were the odds that he had suffered from an allergic reaction this badly? To puke up blood? It didn't make sense, not a whole lot. It's not pollen season. Mom said, Well, there are some that persist this late into the year. but none like this. I tapped him on the shoulder, and he just shuddered. Didn't really move, didn't really do anything. Just shook and went right back to how he was. That was only for a few seconds, though. I shook my head and raised my eyebrows. Well, I did as much as I could to do both. She put both hands on her head before resuming. He started shaking again, harder and harder. I would have mistaken it for a seizure if what happened next didn't happen. Abruptly, he stopped shaking and shot right up. 1 second, he was laying on the ground in a pool of his own blood and that disgusting yellow stuff. The next, he was... Mom was suddenly and violently cut off by a nasty coughing fit. Sounded like it hurt. After a few seconds, she was able to clear her throat and stop coughing. "Geez," she said. "Sorry, that was gross." I shook my head again, silently asking her to continue the story. "Okay," she said. "Right." Rob stood up from the position that he was in, which surprised me. Considering his previous circumstances, it was a little strange. I finally got a more proper look at him. Well, his face, mostly. The yellow gunk wasn't just crusted on his face anymore. It was actively leaking from his ears, eyes, and nose. He started to move towards me. I said his name, but it was like he didn't know who I was. He started to run, so I dove out of the way and went crashing to the pavement. Instead of doing whatever he wanted to do to me, Rob. She broke a little and covered her mouth, to stifle a sob, I assumed. I was wrong. It was horrifying, Michael. That caught me. Normally, she'd use my nickname, Mikey. She'd only use my full name in serious situations. Rob just ran. He sprinted, full speed. Just ran way past me and the store into the forest behind it. It was so horrible. And he left behind more of that stuff, that yellow gunk. It mostly just flew out of his mouth, but some dripped from the other holes in his face. I mean, it's only been like, what, an hour? But nothing's been reported. Nothing has been reported regarding Rob. I am sorry. I rasped. "It's okay," she said. "You didn't do anything." She was once again cut off by a violent coughing fit after she recovered. It looked like there was still more of the story to tell. When I went inside the store, the situation was better, but not by much. Some people were coughing, but it wasn't nearly as bad as what I saw with Rob. It was just the same thing throughout the whole store. Just people intermittently coughing. I never saw if they coughed anything up like how Rob did, but I wouldn't have been surprised if that was the case. I said weakly. I got the groceries and got out as quickly as I could. Things moved fast when I was in the store. By the time I got out, a lot more people were coughing. I did my best to hold my breath as I made my way to the car. I got in and I was able to breathe. Didn't speed, but I made my way home relatively quick. Closed all the windows and doors and shut everything out, tried to. You don't think you got it, did you?" I muttered. "Oh God, I hope not." She said, "It's just so horrible. I think we should stop talking about it." It's late." "Is it?" I asked. "Yes. I need to go to bed for work tomorrow. I'll stop back here periodically to check on you. Stay in the house, okay?" I nodded. "Good," she said, getting up. "I'm not sure what's happening, but we should try and stay S." One last time, she was violently interrupted by another coughing fit. This one went on for longer and sounded more vicious. She finished coughing and quickly turned around. "Good night, Michael," she said, grabbing the door handle with her right hand. "I love you." "Why, you too?" I managed. She closed the door. Her rapid movements hadn't been for nothing. I was sure that she turned around as quickly as she did to hide something that terrified her. Something that terrified me. Something she didn't know I'd seen. She did indeed turn around quickly, but not quickly enough for me to see the yellow mucus-like slime she'd coughed out. Mom got whatever it was. Mom is gone. I woke up earlier today to nothing. No sounds in the house. It felt cold, though. A door must have been opened. Whether it was by Mom or someone else, I don't know. What I know is that she's gone and a door is open somewhere in the house. The fact that I can feel the cold in my room only tells me that I've probably been breathing the outside air. I can't get up. Still too tired to move from my bed. I did wake up with a little more strength. Not much, though. Just enough to do something like using my phone. That's how I'm getting this out. It's been completely silent since this morning, but I'm not so sure that it's going to stay that way. I'm hearing footsteps in the grass outside the part of the house where my room is located. No words, just grunts and small noises. They're outside my house. I'm writing this as a warning. Something's wrong with the air. I don't know what it is or why it's happening, but it's making people sick, making them lose control of their bodies. It's made me sick. Just a few minutes ago, I was plagued by a sudden and savage coughing fit. My throat hurt so badly I had to strain and close my eyes just to mitigate some of the pain. When I opened my eyes, I saw some of the yellow gunk on my blanket. I wish I could do something, anything to help, but I'm sick, in more ways than one. I can't get out of bed. I have whatever this is. And you know the worst part of it all? I wouldn't even be able to do anything if I didn't have this. Still knocked out with the flu. What I can do, however, is send out a warning. This infection, whatever it may be, is turning people into God. I don't even know what to call them. Mindless, feral, almost zombie-like. It's something in the air. I know that much for sure. If you haven't already caught it, get inside and hunker down. Get as much food as you can and make sure your home is well sealed. And most importantly, when you're outside, don't breathe it in. I only wanted warmth and shelter. What I found in their basement still haunts me. I wasn't sure I would survive. The storm hit harder than anything I'd seen before. I tried to get out my satellite phone, but my fingers couldn't press the buttons. Every step felt harder. Fingers and toes didn't hurt anymore. They just felt numb. Then, like a beacon, I saw an outline of a house. I knocked on the door, barely able to clench my fist. An old woman came out and quickly rushed me in. My whole world felt like a blur. When they took the gloves off, my fingers had started to turn white. "You almost lost your fingers," the old woman said. The heat from the fireplace felt like stabs to my hands and feet, but I reluctantly warmed myself up. They said they hadn't seen a storm as bad as this one in years. I was lucky to find their house. Their house smelled of cooked meat, making my body shiver with excitement. The old couple was nice enough to let me eat with them. The steak tasted like beef mixed with pork. It had a soft texture with a delicious, sweet taste. "How do you like your steak, sweetheart?" the old woman asked. "The steak is delicious. What did you season it with?" I returned the question. "Only salt and pepper, nothing else." She replied. They both laughed and looked at each other. The man then stared me up and down and got back to his dinner. After the meal, I finally regained my senses. The place seemed stranger than I thought at first. Their house was a mess. Trash and old equipment were scattered all around. In the next room, there were splatters of yellow and dark red liquid on the walls. "You should stay the night, mister. The storm will rage on. If you don't want to almost die again," the old man said sternly. I didn't like this place, but it was better than the instant death that was awaiting outside. They let me sleep on the couch next to the fireplace. The old woman brought me a blanket and sat next to me. Her eyes were staring me down, just like her husband did. "Are you okay lying on the couch here, sweetie?" she asked. "Yes, thank you for all the hospitality," I replied. She then started rubbing my back and shoulder. This soon turned into squeezing and feeling my muscles around. I scooted away from her. "You must have walked a long way. You poor thing," she said. I laughed nervously and thanked her. That night, I woke up to strange sounds coming from the basement. The more I listened, the more I realized it sounded like muffled screams. I looked out the window, and the storm was now worse than when I first stumbled in. I pulled a small knife from my backpack and lay on the couch, clutching it. The muffling grew louder. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to help anyone or anything trapped down there. The floorboards creaked under my steps. My heart was beating so hard I could hear it. I put my hand on the door handle and hesitated for a while. Every sense in my body was screaming to ignore the sounds, but I couldn't. I never ignored another human's cries for help, and this cabin was not going to make me act any differently. I slowly opened the door. The room was dark and cold. I walked down the steps, searching for a light switch. My hand ran over something. I pressed it. There were 4 mattresses, black and filthy, with cockroaches crawling around them. Each mattress had a person lying on it, with one or both hands chained to the wall. They had rags on instead of clothing, unwashed with dry blood on them. Their eyes were wide with terror, and their mouths duct-taped. There were 3 men and 1 woman. Each of them was missing at least 1 limb. Most of them had both of their legs cut off, but one man in the very back was missing both legs and an arm. He was the one screaming the least, looking like he was in a trance. As I walked down, the smell of the room turned slightly sour, almost coppery. The nausea was growing. I couldn't stand the sight of this horror. My body started to gag, and I threw up my dinner all over the wooden steps. I slowly stumbled back up the steps. The floorboards creaked above me. Then I felt a quick, sharp pinch in my neck. I turned around. Behind me, the old couple stood on the steps, flashing the same grin they had at the dinner table. I tried to walk towards the man, but my legs wouldn't move. My fist let go of the knife, and I slowly lost consciousness. I woke up on a mattress with cockroaches crawling over my body. I tried to shake myself around to get the bugs off. My mouth was duct-taped, and all I could make out were the same muffling sounds as the others imprisoned. Before going down to the basement, I managed to send my location and concerns to one of my friends, an officer a few towns away. But I forgot to check if the message came through. I heard the old woman humming upstairs. The door opened. A flashlight shone down the steps. "How's our new friend settled in?" I heard her say in her sweet voice. I tried to get out of the chains, but they were tight around my wrists. Her steps were slowly approaching, and the flashlight blinded me. Then I heard the faint sound of engines. I prayed it wasn't just the storm playing tricks on me. A siren echoed in the distance. I heard footsteps running up the stairs. The basement fell into darkness again. They found me before the old couple came down with their tools. I gave my report at the hospital. The officers informed me that they only found the woman. The man is still out there. My father loved a good paper trail. He always stressed the necessity of having proper documentation for every purchase, every agreement, every discussion that ended with something fundamentally different than when it had begun. He believed in the importance of paperwork and the uselessness of a good handshake. The only legally binding thing a hand can do is putting to paper, he'd always say. And to believe the gesture of touching palm to palm holds any sort of weight is to open yourself up to the evils of human dishonesty. It is for this reason that, upon his recent death, my sister and I were left with the long, arduous task of sorting through the library of paperwork that the man left behind. When I call the collection a library, I do so without an ounce of hyperbole. His vast hoard of papers easily filled an entire large room's worth of drawers, files, and shelves. We knew we'd have to handle his last will and testament when he passed, and knowing our old man, we figured it would be a headache to get through. But at the time we thought this one document would be the worst of it. We had no idea what we were getting ourselves into. Upon diving into his extensive collection of records, we were both genuinely surprised by how many old documents the man had hung onto over the years, even long after their usefulness had dried up. Bank membership forms from the 1970s for banks long since defunct, half-century-old grocery store receipts handwritten in blotchy, messy ink, parking tickets paid lifetimes ago for cars he hadn't owned in decades. It was all there, filed away neatly in the darkness of his old office, waiting for the day that we'd have the displeasure of drawing it all back out into the light. Knowing that most of it was worthless, we were tempted to simply shred it all and throw it away. But the persistent nagging that something of importance might be hidden in that massive trove of paperwork was strong enough that it convinced us to sort through it all manually. In a way, this was actually a much more enriching experience than I would have thought. We got to see how our father's signature evolved throughout his life, and going through those decades worth of documents gave us the sense that we were reliving that life from start to finish. But at the same time, it was an agonizing chore that I dreaded doing each day. Because yes, it took us days to sort through all of that old paperwork, most of which was a complete waste of time. I suppose I couldn't really be upset about having to complete this final task for our old man. He provided us with a good life growing up, and the minor burden of sorting out his paper affairs after his death was a small price to pay compared to the work he had put in to ensure that we never wanted for anything, and had always lived in the lap of comfort and luxury. I also can't blame him for his overly cautious desire to keep a paper trail of his entire life. He came of age in an industrial town during a time when industry was on its way out. Jobs spawned through handshakes, and goodwill suddenly vanished when the mines dried up and the mill's furnaces went forever cold. Nobody got any form of a severance package back then. One day you had a job, the next you didn't. One day you were able to put food on the table, the next you weren't. It was a harsh, unforgiving time in our region's history, one that we haven't yet fully recovered from even more than half a century later, and it set the stage for what my father's life would eventually become. Times were tough for our father and mother after he'd lost his job at the old mill. They managed to keep afloat for a while thanks to our mom's waitressing, as well as the various odd jobs that our dad worked. But it soon became clear to everyone in town back then that their livelihoods were dependent on an industry that had gone to an early grave, and without that industry, their economy wasn't going to last. Our parents needed a backup plan if they were going to have any hope of getting by. Thankfully, our old man had one. Our dad loved to paint from a very young age. In fact, the second largest collection that he left behind, after his collection of paperwork, was his vast accumulation of personal paintings that he kept in his private gallery. For his own purposes, he used to say. Before the decline, painting had only ever been a hobby for him, a way to decompress and pass the time between grueling shifts at the mill. He never thought he could have made a living off of his work until the desperate times came, and he found himself backed into a corner with no other means of making ends meet. And so, with his prospects running as dry as the mines and his optimism going as cold as the mills, he turned to that old passion in hopes that it would offer him a means of escaping from the ever-deepening hole that he found himself trapped in, sitting to work like a man possessed. He drew inspiration for his paintings from the urban decay and gothic, almost sinister landscapes of the region in which he had grown up. His work brought him little success in the backwater town that he called home, where people could barely put food on the table, let alone afford to blow their hard-earned wages on frivolous pieces of art depicting scenes that they could look at for free with a simple glance out their windows. Knowing that he had no hope of making a living from his art in his current environment, and with the area's decline only growing worse by the day, my mom and dad decided to take on the ultimate gamble. They packed up their things worth keeping, sold the rest, and departed from the only place that either of them had ever called home. Their time spent away was, until the unfolding of recent events, largely a mystery to me. I knew they spent some time on the West Coast, where my father continued to work on his stalled art career, but any details of his successes and failures there were never shared with my sister or me by our parents. All either of us knew is that by the time they returned home more than a decade later, their fortune had been secured. I wish I had known the circumstances that had led to that fortune sooner. I wish I had asked them questions while they were both still alive to answer. While I doubt they would have told me the whole truth, I might have been able to glean something about what had happened while they were away. The work of going through my dad's old records started as a tedious slog, and only got worse as the task went on. We brought a shredder into his office and began meticulously going through each document, ensuring that it was irrelevant before condemning it to its fate. Leafing through those old files and deciphering the messy, aging words scrawled therein would have been annoying, bothersome work for people half our age, and with us now into our 50s, with our worsening eyes and less nimble hands, the task was an even greater test of patience. We did our best to stay positive during this time, to talk about our memories of Dad, and, to a much lesser extent, of Mom, and to keep the atmosphere as light and easy as we could. But this became more difficult as time went on, and we became disheartened by just how little progress we made against the seemingly insurmountable horde of records that we needed to sort through. The first noteworthy record, and thus the first one worth keeping, was found by my sister toward the end of the second day. I had just gotten back from taking a box of 3 decades worth of fast food receipts to the garage trash can. I hadn't bothered to shred them when I heard her speak from across the room. Oh wow. I placed the now empty box on a nearby shelf and turned to look at her. What's up? Find something interesting? I'd say so, my sister said. Come take a look. I approached her. As I drew near, I saw that she was at the beginning of a fresh box of records, possibly even on the very first item inside. When I came up alongside her, she looked at me with an excited smile that she hadn't even considered wearing since the start of our task the previous day. She handed me the slip of paper in her hand without speaking, and I looked down at what was written upon it. It was a bill of sale for one of my father's paintings, one titled Gothic Decay. The bill was dated May of 1958, about 3 months after he and my mother had moved out west. His first sale, my sister said. I should have known he'd have kept the receipt for it. I read the bill over again and frowned slightly. Not the most lucrative sale in the world, was it? Well, no, she said, but it was a start. She looked back into the box that she had pulled the bill from. It looks like these are all sale receipts for his paintings from back then, maybe even every single one that he sold. Knowing Dad, it probably is every single one of them, I said. My sister pulled the next one from the list. It was dated September of 1958, roughly 4 months later, and indicated that the painting had sold for a similarly pitiful price. The third sold in December, again for what I'm sure was barely even enough to cover the cost of his art supplies. Not a lot of money coming in that first year, huh? I said. This pattern continued for 2 more instances before ending in April of the next year. In almost a year's time, our dad had only managed to sell 5 paintings, and each for far lower than he probably would have liked. I might have felt bad for him, had I not known of the wealth he would eventually amass. By flipping through the receipts, we learned that he didn't sell another painting for most of that year, until November of 1959. I imagine during that long gap, he'd been forced to jump back into doing odd jobs in order to make ends meet. That likely led to a perpetual cycle of grueling work, during which he probably had little time to paint, and even less time to market his work. It's a miracle his aspirations didn't die there, and if I didn't know any better, I would have assumed they had. My sister looked at the receipt from November of '59 and whistled sharply. Hot damn, look at this one. I did as she instructed, then joined in her surprised whistle. Shit, that's quite a jump. I guess this is when he finally made it. Huh. To say he had made it with this sale was an understatement. This piece, titled Rusttown Blues, sold for more than double what all of his previous paintings had sold for combined. And things didn't stop there. In fact, they only seemed to speed up. He sold 2 more paintings that November, each for a higher price than the last. In December, he sold 8 more. In 1960, our old man was selling upwards of 10 paintings a month, and the number only grew from there. Over the course of the next decade, he sold dozens and dozens of paintings each year, each for staggering amounts of money. I didn't know how he ever had enough time to complete so many paintings, and I wondered if his seemingly obsessive commitment to his work is what sowed the seeds for what my mom eventually did. Exactly 10 years later, to the very day in November of 1969, he sold his last painting of the bunch. It would be the last one he ever sold in his life. And that's all she wrote. My sister said, "This must be when he and Mom came back home." I said, "A shame he didn't paint any more after that." "Well, a few years after they came home is when he and Mom had us," she said. "Must have been tough to keep up his work while raising a family." "Yeah, well, Mom didn't exactly make it any easier for him, did she?" I said. My sister shook her head. "No, that she didn't." I paused for a contemplative moment before speaking again. "You ever feel like we took his dream from him?" My sister shook her head. He had plenty of time to pursue that dream. He and Mom had us pretty late, especially for the time, and they knew that if they wanted to raise a family, they really needed to get on it. They made the choice to come back here and have us. We didn't force it on them. I shrugged, still itching with a sudden sense of guilt that I couldn't quite shake. "Yeah, I guess you're right." Just like how nobody forced Mom to change her mind. Yeah, she said. That too. We let the conversation drop and returned to our work. The painting sales were the first items in the entire collection to be spared from the shredder, deciding it was good karma to finish on that high note. We wrapped up our efforts for the day and both of us went home. I spent a long time that night thinking about those dozens and dozens of paintings that my father had sold back then, wishing that I could see even one of them. I had shrunk so far into my own head that my wife actually noticed my aloofness and asked if I was all right. I reassured her that I was, even if the answer didn't feel entirely honest. She eventually drifted off to bed, and I decided to decompress for another hour or so before following her there. I opened my laptop and looked up a few of the names of my dad's old paintings that I remembered from the receipts to see if copies of them had ever been posted online. No dice for any of them. His works must have only really traveled in small, private circles, which had evidently kept them just as private for all of these years. I suppose the money earned from them was tangible enough, but I found myself wishing that I had more to remember my old man by than just a bunch of rotting old documents collecting dust in his house. My sister and I started back up again the next morning. We spent most of the day locked back into the banality that we had grown accustomed to in the previous 2 days. My sister threw out a box of expired grocery store coupons. We once again didn't even bother shredding those, while I saw to the destruction of a drawer full of long-expired vehicle registrations from several different states. She shredded dozens upon dozens of old bank statements. I found and rescued our parents' marriage license, which I considered destroying for a brief moment, before deciding that it was just barely worth keeping around, if only in remembrance of a happier time when the 4 of us all still lived under the same roof. Besides, our father had never actually officially filed for a divorce. He'd never been able to find our mother in order to make such a thing official. So I figured keeping the marriage license around could almost trick us into believing that those good times never actually came to an end. Inconsequential acts of shredding and saving went on for some time until I discovered a file stuffed with years upon years of census data, something I almost tossed without a second thought. Had I actually done so, instead of taking a few minutes to leaf through those papers, I may have never discovered the knowledge that I am now forever burdened with. Upon deciphering the messy handwriting, I managed to find my parents' names in the 1958 census listed at some West Coast address that I had understandably never heard of before. A quick online search told me that it was a small, one-bedroom apartment that, based on its pictures, looked like it hadn't been renovated since well before our parents had lived there. The 1959 data showed similar information. It wasn't until I reached the 1960 sheet that I raised my eyebrows in surprise. The hell is this? My sister, who was in the middle of eating a peanut butter sandwich, turned to look at me. What is it? I flipped back and forth between the 3 sheets, thoroughly confused. This census data, it doesn't make sense. My sister returned her sandwich to its plastic bag, placed the combo onto a nearby box of records, and walked toward me. What do you mean? What can be so crazy about census data? Take a look, I said, handing her the 3 pages. These first 2 just show Mom and Dad as living in an apartment together. Nothing strange there. But look at the sheet for 1960. My sister did as instructed, then frowned as realization hit her. Who is this 3rd person listed here? I don't know, I said. It's kind of hard to read the handwriting on that thing, and parts of it aren't even filled out. But it looks like she has our last name. Did a relative of Dad's come to stay with them for a while or something? I guess that's possible, she said. Then, after a pause, their address is also different on this 3rd one. I looked up the address on the 1960 paper and found that the house there, built in the early 1950s, was a huge upgrade to the apartment that my parents had been living in before. This made sense. By early 1960, our dad had started seeing good returns on his painting sales, and they likely could have afforded at least a mortgage on the house by the time the census was collected. But this didn't explain who that 3rd person could have been. My sister took the census file and combed through more of the sheets. This woman, whoever she is, stayed with Mom and Dad for several years, even moving to another house with them. That's weird, I said. How have we not heard of her before? Maybe they had a falling out with her after this, and didn't like to talk about her. I guess that's possible, I said, once again not feeling confident in this explanation. She looks to have moved out when they moved back here, my sister said. She's on the 69 census, but not on the 70 sheet. She must have stayed out west. Do you think she's still alive? My sister asked. I don't know, I admitted. If she is, I wouldn't even know how to get in touch. It makes me wish we still had phone books, she said. I doubt we'd find a woman her age anywhere else. A quick online search proved my sister right. We were unable to find anything conclusive about the mysterious woman who shared our last name. It was as if she didn't even exist outside of that census data. And even then, the information we could glean about her from that paperwork was limited. Her age was left blank on every census form that she appeared on, so we couldn't even guess what her relation was to our dad. With the trail going cold, we dropped the conversation about our mystery relative and moved on with our task. My sister returned the container holding the census data to me, and I continued to comb through it. It contained data for every year of our dad's life from the age of 18 until this past year, when he passed away. I watched as they returned back home from out west, after which their number went from 2 back up to 3 the year after I was born. From there, we expanded to 4 when my sister came into the picture. We remained as 4 for several good years after this. Then, abruptly, the number reduced back to 3. Seeing that sudden reduction felt like a punch to the gut. It took the wind out of my sails and killed my desire to review the remaining years. Following a brief skim of the remaining data, I placed the container aside and, after a short period of consideration, decided not to shred them. I determined that, at the very least, the information present in that thick stack of paper was interesting enough to hold on to. Our day continued on as normal. We were making real progress, and by the end of the day we could see that the end of our cleanup was in sight. We thought about staying late that night and getting ourselves that much closer to the finish line, but seeing as we both had families to return home to, we decided to call it a night at a reasonable hour. I spent a long time thinking about the mystery woman that night. My wife, seeing that I was once again distracted, asked me what was wrong, and I told her about what we'd experienced that day. She reiterated the points that my sister and I had discussed about the woman likely being a relative that our parents had had a falling out with, and suggested that I not worry about who she was too much. This proved difficult to do, but with some effort I managed to set the woman aside long enough that I was able to get some sleep that night. We got started early on the 3rd day, eager to get through the rest of the paperwork with haste so that we could potentially finish the task by that afternoon. Most of the morning passed in a blur of shredded documents, many of which I couldn't identify now if I tried. Scraps of ruined paper filled the several surrounding garbage bags and tarnished the floor in bunches of long, thin streamers. We worked quickly and quietly, with little time spent on conversation. I was certain that we both spent that entire time thinking of the strange woman who shared our last name. Though we hadn't met this woman, nor had we ever even seen her face or learned of her exact connection to our family, there was something about her that made me feel as if I had known her for my entire life. It was a strange sensation that I just couldn't shake, and it made me even more eager to learn more about her. Was she a woman that I had met in my youth and had forgotten about until that census data dredged up the memory of her from the murkiest trenches of my mind? At the time, I was certain I would never know. Anybody who could have told me the truth was already dead. What I didn't realize at the time was that I would be learning her true identity very, very soon. This knowledge would change everything I understood to be true about my family. And even as I write this, I wonder if I would have been better off never knowing it. It was still fairly early into our day when I discovered the file containing the copies of our birth certificates. We might have found it strange that our father had made those copies had we not known who we were dealing with, but it didn't surprise us at all to find them there amongst his collection. What was surprising, however, was that where we had expected to find only 4 birth certificates, we actually found 5. Leafing through the stack, I passed first my sister's, followed by my own, then our mom's, and finally our dad's. I figured this would be the end of the file, and seeing as these were all unofficial copies and were not necessary to keep, I thought I would soon be sacrificing them to the shredder god that had been so gluttonous these last few days. But what I saw there behind my dad's certificate halted my every movement and made me completely forget about the destructive deity that I had just been so ready to honor. I don't remember speaking, but I must have, because my sister asked me what was wrong. Knocked free of my sudden surprise, I looked up at her with a confused look on my face, and, struggling to even find my words, I weakly held out the 5th birth certificate for her to take. My sister approached and took the paper from my lame grip, then grabbed onto it with both hands and looked it over. A frown that must have resembled my own from a few moments ago crept across her face. She briefly flipped it over and looked at the back, as if its rear would somehow reveal it to be some sort of post-mortem prank played on us by our old man. When she saw that it wasn't, she flipped it back over again and reviewed it another time. What the hell is this? I leaned over and once again examined the certificate. Much to my chagrin, its details remained the same as they had been from my initial viewing. Written there in unmistakable black ink was the now familiar name of the woman, of the girl, who had shared our last name. "It's the person from the census," I said, voicing what we both already knew. "The one who lived with Mom and Dad." "Yeah," my sister said, "except her birth year is listed as 1959, the year before the 1960 census. That means instead of being one of Dad's cousins or aunts, she has to be his daughter." I finished for her. Their daughter, and our sister. This fresh revelation stifled us with a stunned silence that clung to us quite some time. My younger sister, so shocked by what she had read, needed to sit down in a nearby chair. I opted to lean against the sturdy desk behind me. "What's going on here?" my younger sibling finally asked. "What's happening?" "I don't know," I told her. These 3 words were the only ones that I could muster. She shot me an almost accusatory look. "You didn't know about this?" "Of course I didn't," I said. "Mom and Dad never told me anything about them having another kid." My sister considered this for a few moments, then seemingly accepted it. What could have happened to her, and why would they keep that from us? I shrugged. "Your guess is as good as mine. Did she suddenly die out west or something?" my sister asked. "Is that why they came back here? To distance themselves from the pain of that experience?" I looked down at the file again. "There isn't a death certificate here. Don't you think if our sister had died that Dad would have included it in this file?" "It could be stored somewhere else," she said. "Or maybe he just didn't want to remind himself of it. Maybe he just wanted to forget whatever happened to her. But then why would he keep her birth certificate in here?" I realized that, unlike the others, this one was the genuine article instead of being a copy. And besides, knowing Dad, he would want that death certificate filed, regardless of how painful it was for him to do. "Maybe she went missing," my younger sister suggested. "Maybe she was abducted or something, and they never declared deceased, just like they did with Mom." "But Mom didn't go missing," I said. "She left." "Still, same idea. Maybe since they never declared her deceased, he never had a death certificate to file." "Maybe. I didn't remember seeing any old articles about a missing child when looking up our older sister's name, but it's possible I either missed them or didn't recognize them as pertaining to the same person that I was researching. You'd think they would have at least told us about her, though. I'm not going to pretend to know what went through their heads at any given time, especially not through hers." I didn't respond for several lengthy seconds. "Yeah," I eventually said. "Yeah, I guess you're right." We didn't speak for a while after that. We didn't quite know what to say. The 2 of us returned to our work, but it was clear that neither one of us was particularly enthusiastic about the task ahead, and so after another half an hour or so of clearing out our father's documents, we decided to call it a day early and return the next day to hopefully finish up. I didn't tell my wife about what we had learned that day. I would eventually, but I needed time to process it for myself before I felt like I'd be able to vocalize our discovery to anybody else without being interrupted by a crippling panic attack or a deadly deluge of tears. I'm sure she realized that something was off about me again, but unlike the previous times, she didn't ask me about it. I think she could tell it was a demon better left undisturbed until the time came that I was ready to poke it with a big, sharp stick. I lay in bed for hours that night, emotionally exhausted from what I had learned that day, but paradoxically unable to sleep. I thought about my older sister, who she had been, where she was now, if she was anywhere at all, why she had been kept a secret from my extant sister and me for more than half a century. Such a train of thought proved to be a strong sleep repellent, but eventually slumber's inevitable persuasion managed to convince my mind to slip into the realm of darkness. When I slept, I dreamed of her. Even though I had never seen her face, I knew the person in front of me was my older sister. She started out as a baby, the age she was when she was in those census papers, but she began to age rapidly, passing through dozens of stages of her life in a matter of seconds. She eventually morphed into the adult woman that she may or may not have ever become. I asked her what had happened to her, why she had been lost to us for so long. She couldn't answer. All she could do was frown at me, and then start to cry. Spirits were low the next morning. My younger sister and I felt crippled by the seemingly unconquerable task that was sorting through the relatively few remaining documents in our father's collection. But with a pair of heavy hearts and a lack of enthusiasm, we set to work on completing the job before us. I don't remember when or where my sister found the contract. I suppose these details don't matter. What matters is that its discovery changed everything, and that it unleashed something into our lives that we would never be able to put back into the metaphorical tube. God, how I wish we could. It was buried beneath a pile of other contracts of significantly lesser importance. My little sister might have even looked past it and thrown it away, had she not been careful, though I doubt she could have missed the bizarre Stygian signature planted beneath our father's at the contract's end. She spent a while reading it over before she showed it to me. It wasn't very long, so she must have reviewed it at least a dozen times while I sorted through other things, oblivious to her prolonged silence that had been so normal that day. The document didn't read quite like any contract I'd ever seen before, and certainly not like any of the contracts that were in our father's collection. It was handwritten on a sheet of yellow, ancient-looking parchment, penned in a way that looked like it had been scrawled in haste, but at the same time with an elegant penmanship that looked practiced, as if its writer had ample experience drafting such documents. I refused to copy down the words of the contract verbatim, but will do my best to paraphrase. The contract stated that for a period of 10 years, our father's paintings would bring him fame, wealth, and success. He would create important and beloved works of art with both haste and ease, which would effortlessly sell as soon as they went up for auction. At the expiration of those 10 years, the wealth he'd earned would remain, but his fame and status would be forever lost to the greater world, remembered only by himself and by anybody who believed him when he told of his forgotten past. Also on that day, exactly 10 years from the signing of the contract, and on each subsequent 10th anniversary, the writer of the contract would return to collect something from our father of the writer's choosing, which our father could not refuse. This would continue until the death of either party involved in the contract. The document was signed twice, first by our father in that same handwriting that we had seen countless times and grown intimately familiar with in the last few days. His signature was followed by a nightmarish scratching of lines and shapes that I cannot in good faith call a word, at least not one present in any known language. Just looking at this malicious shape made me profoundly uncomfortable, and conjured within my mind countless pillars of evil imaginable only to the most tormented of souls, and many that are mercifully beyond any existence soul to ever know. Both signatures, if this is what you want to consider this second blaspheme of writing, were penned in a splotchy, reddish-brown solution that I could not identify, but which I doubted and still highly doubt was any sort of ink. Our father's name was written in neat print next to his signature so that it was easily legible. The other signer's name, however, was not awarded the same privilege. Beneath both signatures, though, was written a date, one that fell in early November of 1959. My sister and I sat in incomprehensible silence for what felt like hours, passing the contract back and forth whenever one of us had mustered the courage to read it over again. The heavy, unspeakable weight of the document resting between us seemed to distort the very fabric of reality with its density. When we finally spoke of it, both of us acted as if we didn't understand what this contract could have meant, but I'm sure that we both knew right away what its implications were. Our father, still struggling to make a living even after he and our mother had moved out west, entered into an agreement with someone or something that promised him the success he so desperately dreamed of and craved. And so he acquired a decade of wealth, fame, and success in exchange for a lifetime tormented by whatever entity he had taken up this contract with. He would then go on to die in obscurity, the extent of his success remembered by nobody else except for the thing that continued to collect from him decade after decade, taking more and more from the man that it was so determined to torment and eventually destroy. Such were the terms that our father had entered into, and such were the terms to which the contract had bound him, until the time came that death finally set him free. I'm sure it's not a mystery what this entity collected from him after that first decade had passed. Subsequent decades, though, are a little more unclear, but I have a strong idea of at least two of those collections, which occurred while I still lived in our family home. One of these I'm sure you can deduce. The other I choose to keep to myself. Thinking back with a freshly open mind to those early years of my life, I can recall a pair of times that I am now certain each occurred on a year ending in 9, that I was awoken by a suffocating sense of overwhelming, primal darkness that swept over our family home in the blackest, coldest hours of the night. At the time, I assumed these occurrences to be the product of my own personal nightmares, quickly forgotten and seemingly unrelated to the tragedies that immediately followed them the next day. One of these occurrences came when I was just a boy. Another, when I was on the cusp of becoming a man. The former came at a time in my life when I did not fully understand the tragedy of loss. The latter was how I became truly acquainted with it. More visitations and subsequent collections must have occurred after I'd moved out on my own, but since I was not present for them, their energies must not have reached me. I'm sure if I try, though, I can conjure more family tragedies that occurred in the final years of decades past, but at the time of writing this, I'm not entirely interested in reliving old pains, just so I can recontextualize them with my present knowledge. Nor do I wish to discuss such things with my living sister, much like how I get the sense she'd rather not broach such subjects with me. I write this only a handful of weeks after having found my father's contract. My sister and I didn't finish our project that day, and we still haven't been back to sort through the rest of our old man's records. I'm not sure when we will, if we ever do. We left that contract locked in the sturdy drawer of a metal filing cabinet in our father's empty home until the day comes that we ever feel the need to reassess it. In the meantime, I've spent these few weeks in a complicated state of mourning for those I've lost and those I've never truly known, my father seeming to fall into both categories quite nicely. I've also spent a lot of time wondering. I wonder about what lies ahead for my sister and me at the end of this decade, now that our father is no longer alive to fulfill his end of the contract. When I last read the terms of the document, it explicitly stated that the contract expired with my father, but I would not be surprised to find those terms mysteriously amended, should I pull that cursed record from its metal coffin and review what was written upon it. I get the strong, nauseating sense that the words next of kin might appear somewhere in there now, indicating that our family is not yet free from the curse that my father, blinded by a desperation that I hesitate to call greed, forever shackled us to. At the time of writing this, my sister and I now have less than 4 years, time so agonizingly long, while also so alarmingly brief, until we know if we are truly freed from the contract that has been furtively looming over us for our entire lives. I doubt if either of us will allow a single day to pass where we don't think of the document that we left locked away in our dad's home, where it will fester and rot until the day comes for its terms to flex their power once more. I'm sure we will both think at length, as I already have, about what will come for us on that cold autumn day in November of 2029, about the dark, primordial presence that is no longer bound by its contract with our father, and which may very well now possess free rein to attack us directly with its deadly claws of overwhelming malice. But I suppose we'll just have to wait and see what comes. Hernando de Leon entered New York City Hall on white horseback, his sword wet with blood and his polished conquistador armor gleaming. Everybody imperious, pen-wielding municipal workers and lowly, groveling denizens alike, went silent, stared. You could hear a pin drop or the languid clickety-clack of a horse's hooves advance upon the marble floor. "May I help you?" a worker asked. Hernando de Leon answered in Spanish, or rather spoke, because he didn't understand English. A few fearful denizens escaped the building. Blood dripped from Hernando de Leon's sword. Nice costume, but the office of the Society of Recreational Historical Recreations is in another building, said a clerk. Hernando de Leon slashed him across the face. "Ah," before repeating what he'd said previously in Spanish, except more slowly and with the horse-rearing flourish. A Puerto Rican was eventually found to interpret, and when a pompous aide came down the stairs and demanded to know what a conquistador wanted in New York City, the Puerto Rican shrugged her shoulders and said, "He wants to claim it for the Spanish crown." To which the aide responded, "That's ridiculous. Somebody call the police. This man is obviously mentally ill." Infamous last words, because Hernando de Leon was soon holding the aide's decapitated head by its blonde hair and, swinging it like he would a lantern, asking, by way of the Puerto Rican interpreter, "Who dares defy the will of Her Catholic Majesty, Queen Isabella of Castile?" Meanwhile, in one of the furthermost offices in the City Hall building, in the mostly secretive department of narrative and urban continuities, a young man was struggling to navigate the labyrinthine automated phone messaging system of the Karma Police. Finally, he heard the words, "To report an anachronism, please press 22. Exhaled and pressed 222. Greenwood punched York in the shoulder, checked his gun, and pulled on his trench. "So much for a quiet day of shooting the shit," he said. York grumbled, spat a wad of wet nicotine gum into a trash can ping, took out and lit a cigarette, and shoved it in his mouth. He and Greenwood got in their Karma Police cruiser. "Conquistador, eh?" said York when they were already driving. "He must have tried writing some half-assed historical fiction. You know how he's always writing something other than New York City. Pathetic fuck. I bet my bi-weekly salary he started a tale, didn't finish, forgot about the character, which stumbled around the unfinished dark before finding a narrative seam and pushed through it into here to become our problem." "Classic goddamn Crane," said York. They parked in front of City Hall and walked in through the front doors. Regular officers of the NZPD were already waiting outside. Greenwood tipped his hat, and the captain tipped his back. "Glad you boys are here. I've been told to stand down, but it's a shit show in there. The maniac's cutting people's heads off and yelling about the primacy of Spain and how he's going to get the Pope involved. Shame about the marble, too. I hope they manage to scrub the blood off it." "Beautiful building," mused York. "Sure is. Say, are you into architecture?" asked the captain. "Who," York noted, "was tall and handsome and had deep blue dreamy eyes. Because there's an exhibition over at the Mic," by which he meant the Micropelican Museum of Art, about American brutalism. "I haven't been. Maybe, if you want, we could go together." But the screams from inside City Hall combined with Greenwood's elbow to York's ribs cut the moment short, and all York said was, "Maybe some other time," and the captain couldn't even tell York his name before York and Greenwood were making their way up the steps to the building's front entrance. They'd drawn their weapons. Behind them, the boys in NZPD Blue had their backs. "Ready?" asked Greenwood. "Let's do it, partner." They entered and immediately saw Hernando de Leon on horseback. He was pretty hard to miss. Surrounded by dead bodies, most of which were headless. The heads themselves were piled elsewhere. There was a lot of blood. The tension was congealed. The fear was so palpable you could have cut it with a Spanish falchion. Greenwood thought the conquistador looked rather magnificent as he shot him. But unexpectedly, the bullet pinged off Hernando de Leon's armor and killed a bystander. "One." "Ah," said the dying bystander. "Fuck," said Greenwood. York's 2 shots also ricocheted off the irritated conquistador's fine Spanish armor, but they killed no one. "This isn't like Crane at all," York said, as Hernando de Leon turned his mount to face them. Then he cursed them in Spanish, which the Puerto Rican interpreter interpreted dutifully as, "I spit on the angry bitch that gave birth to such English mongrel dogs as you," before also explaining that the "you" was plural. Crane's characters were usually so figuratively thin that any literal armor they might be wearing would essentially be papier-mâché. All glitz, no steel. "It's got to be the work of some other author," said Greenwood, as Hernando de Leon, sword drawn, teeth bared, pulled the reins of his great white horse, which reared up dramatically, neighed and dropped its hooves like 2 claps of thunders, and roared towards them. They threw themselves to the bloody marble floor to evade the conquistadors' cutting blows, but he swept past and kept going, bursting through the city hall's doors and continuing down the steps, where, through NZPD gunfire that sounded like a hailstorm of ping-ping-dings, he emerged onto the street itself and set off at a wild gallop. York and Greenwood got up, got out, got into their Karma police cruiser, and floored the accelerator to speed after him. Their distinct siren blared. Now, following an armored conquistador who's riding a white horse through downtown New York City in daytime wasn't difficult for Essie. He stood out like a mangled thumb, and a cruiser is faster than a horse. But it was late afternoon, the dreaded rush hour, and where a car gets stuck behind another car, a horse can squeeze between lanes like a motorcycle or gallop on the sidewalk, knocking shocked pedestrians out of the way, which is exactly what happened, leaving York and Greenwood static and honking. The Karma police were not to be outdone, however. Within a minute, Greenwood had spied a tandem bicycle leaning against the wall of a pharmacy. He and York had commandeered it, and as its hippie owners ran out of the pharmacy yelling, "Hey, what's the big idea? That's our ride." Greenwood and York were pedaling furiously in Hernando de Leon's general direction. "Faster, faster," yelled York, who was sitting behind Greenwood, who was yelling, "Tell that to yourself. I'm going as fast as I can." York was thinking he'd rather be fishing. Greenwood was thinking of all the paperwork the omniscience would force them to fill out as they broke through a sheet of glass being carried across the sidewalk by 2 moving men, one of whom was Rex Rosado, shattering it into 1,000 pieces, then sent an innocent bystander barreling headfirst into an illegal fruit stand and crashed through an old pimp whose golden skull-handled walking cane went flying into the air. York caught it, and he and Greenwood both caught sight of Hernando de Leon, inadvertently helping answer the age-old question. Who's faster, a conquistador on horseback or 2 middle-aged cops on a bicycle? "See him?" asked Greenwood. They were absolutely rocketing down the sidewalk, muscles aching, the city a blur. "Uh-huh," said York, nestling his newly acquired pimp's cane in his left armpit while taking out his gun and taking aim at the conquistador with his right hand. But he wasn't aiming at the man. He was aiming at the horse. "Just a little closer, and I'll send that Spanish fuckface first into the asphalt." Unfortunately, he didn't get the chance, because at that very moment, as Hernando de Leon was glancing back at his pursuers, he sped through a red light, whose purpose he would not have been aware of even if he hadn't been glancing back, and was smashed into by a black limousine, which, honking, came to a screeching halt on the far side of the intersection. Hernando de Leon's horse ended up on the limousine's hood, partly through its windshield, and the conquistador had been launched spinning through the air before landing, with a thudding crack, in the middle of the street. All other traffic had stopped. People were gathering, not to help but to leer and take photos. The driver of the limousine was unconscious. The sole passenger had stepped out and was telling the 2 approaching Karma policemen, who were out of breath, "Do you have any idea who I am? Clear this lunatic off the street immediately. I'm in a hurry." Because he couldn't answer, because he was out of breath, York smacked him in the side of the head with his pimp's cane to shut him up. Greenwood flashed his badge. "You cannot treat Laszlo soft this way. You cannot," the man yelled. York told everyone else to get the fuck back. Greenwood walked over to Hernando de Leon's horse, which was damaged beyond help and snorting loudly, its twin nostrils raging against the dying of the light, and put it out of its misery with a shot to the head. Laszlo Soft recoiled. Then York and Greenwood kneeled down on either side of Hernando de Leon. They pulled off his helmet, revealing black hair and a scarred face covered with a thick beard. The conquistador's eyes were filled with a receding fire, like a reflection of a burning raft floating away downriver. "Who sent you?" Greenwood asked. Hernando de Leon was delirious. York slapped his face. Hernando de Leon whispered something in blood-clotted Spanish about Isabella. "Who wrote you? Who the fuck is your creator?" York demanded. "Is it Crane? Norman Crane?" There entered the conquistador's face a sudden calmness, followed by a flash of awe. His eyes widened, blood and saliva squirted through his yellow teeth, and he said, "No, senor. Bernal Diaz del Castillo. Dios mío. Toda la plata del mundo." And he was dead. Greenwood heard the sound of an approaching ambulance, but as usual, the paramedics were getting there too late. "Who the Tin Man?" someone in the crowd asked. Others started wondering the same. "He hot," a woman said. Someone commented about the horse. "Shame he dead." Rumors, stories, and lies began circulating in a whitewater hush, foaming with scandal. Laszlo Soft covered his face before getting back into the limousine and calling a new one. "You know what that means," Greenwood said to York. York growled. "There was a knock on the door, not there but here, and I fucking hate it when that happens, because it almost gives me a heart attack." I opened. "What do you two want?" I asked. "Did you write the foo?" York started to say before Greenwood caught him off. "We just want to know if you wrote the Conquistador, Hernando de Leon, or Bernal Diaz del Castillo." "No," I said. "You're sure?" "Yes. You wouldn't be hiding any secret historical fiction from us, would you? Because if you were, we'd find it. And then I'd personally make sure things would get really fucking bad for you, Crane," said York, with a touch of performance. "I don't even know anything about conquistadors, or Spain, or the conquest of the Americas," I said. "Do you honestly think I could write a character that's solid?" "No," said York, "because we ran the name Bernal Diaz del Castillo, and nothing came up," said Greenwood. "I typed the name into a search engine. Maybe we misheard," said York. "No, you didn't mishear," I said. "Bernal Diaz del Castillo exists, existed, just not in New York City. He existed in the real world. A dead novelist. Dead, not quite a novelist. What then? He was a real conquistador who, in the 16th century, wrote a memoir called The True History of the Conquest of New Spain." "I don't fucking get it," said York. "Some guy writes a non-fiction book centuries before any of us were imagined or alive, and one of his characters shows up in Manhattan today? That's peak incomprehensibility. I wouldn't worry about it. It's just an anachronism. You dealt with it. It's dead and gone." "Yeah, it's dead," echoed York. "Anyway, thanks for your time," said Greenwood. He made to leave. "Just remember, keep fucking writing these New Zork tales," said York menacingly, poking me in the chest with his finger. "No other stories." "Got it. I got it," I said. They left, but there was something I hadn't told them. When I pulled up the Wikipedia page about Bernal Diaz del Castillo's The True History of the Conquest of New Spain, for an initial, fluttering moment, the work hadn't been titled The True History of the Conquest of New Spain at all, but The True History of the Conquest of New Zork. All that evening I wondered if, somehow, the Spanish were considering a military takeover of New Zork, and if they pulled it off, and if I helped them pull it off, might there be my way of getting free of New Zork City forever?